Voices with Monica and Caroline. I am your host, Monica Hadley, and our guest today is Pam Webber. Now, the book is, I think I've got this pronounced right, Massawa. Massawa, A Tale of Illusion, Espionage, and Love. And Pam is a former nursing academic and a current internal medicine nurse practitioner, and historical fiction is her second career. She's the best-selling author of novels The Wiregrass, Moonwater, and Life Dust, which have garnered multiple awards. And she lives in the northern Shenandoah Valley of Virginia. Welcome to Writers' Voices, Pam.
Hi, Monica. I'm happy to be here.
So this is a World War II novel. Now, I have interviewed a lot of authors of World War II historical fiction over the 20 years I've been doing this, but this is the first time that the book has been set in Northern Africa. What drew you to that region to set your historical novel?
That's the first question I always get is, why North Africa? When the first three books that I did were in a series, and I ended that series, and I was contemplating what to do next, where to go next, and I was actually having lunch with my brother Bud, who is an amateur historian. But there's nothing amateurish about him. He's an incredible historian, and he specializes in the little known stories that people don't know anything about. And he said, you need to tell the story of the miracle at Massawa. And I said, I've never heard of it. What is the miracle at Massawa? And the more he talked, the more that the book just appeared in front of me. The title appeared in front of me, and I knew that it was a story that needed to be told. That not only, World War II has so many great stories, but this one is special in that the circumstances that brought about the miracle of Massawa. You talk about American ingenuity and know-how and drive to get it done. This is a story that tells that, in addition to a bunch of other things too, but it basically centers on the miracle at Massawa.
Okay, so why is it known as the miracle of Massawa?
Because to give a real quick recap on history, in late 1941, the British, Rommel had invaded North Africa. He was trying to secure the Suez Canal and the rich oil fields of the Middle East. And if he had been successful in that, the war literally might have turned out a lot differently. So the Brits, they were fighting him in North Africa, but they needed help. It's North Africa, so there were not a lot of resources for their troops. There was very little oil. There were very little supplies, etc. And Churchill needed those supplies. Well, when the Italians had homesteaded and taken over Eritrea for the past 70 years, they had a naval base at Massawa. They also had an air base at Gura. But when the Brits invaded Eritrea in late 1941, the Italians absolutely destroyed the naval base in their retreat. They took essential things down on the docks, the cranes and all that kind of stuff that's used for servicing ships. And they sank 40 vessels, 40 ships across the mouth of the bay at Massawa to keep the Allied forces from coming in. Well, Churchill sent his salvage people to Massawa to say, we need that base. Can you get this base up and running? Can you salvage base? They came back and told him no, that the base was not salvageable. Churchill, being Churchill, didn't believe him. And he contacted Roosevelt and said, do you have anybody that you can send to this base in Massawa, Eritrea, to see if we can resurrect this base? Well, there was nobody to send because Pearl Harbor had happened by then, And all of the American naval salvage people were at Pearl. But there was this one man, his name was Captain Edward Ellsberg, came out of retirement and said, I'll go. So he goes by himself to, he takes a long 6-week boat trip from hell to try to get there. But he goes to Massawa, and in 6 days, he reports back to Roosevelt, yes, the base can be salvaged. In a week or so, he had 6 people, a couple of Americans, a couple of Brits, but he resurrected that base with that handful of people and 6,000 Eritreans. 6,000 Eritreans. And he did it in 6 weeks. In 6 weeks, he had that base. It wasn't perfect by a long shot, but he could get ships in. He raised the dry docks that the Italians had sunk, and within 6 weeks, he was servicing one of the big supply ships that was supposed to supply the Brit forces that were fighting Rommel to the north. And they basically did the same thing with the air base. So it really was a miracle that the base got resurrected, and it was at the hands of this one American man.
Well, your book isn't really focused on that, on the resurrection of the base, so much as everything going on around it.
Correct.
How, yeah,
One of
so
the
how did you find this story, and is it based on, are your characters based on true historical people?
the character, well, Captain Ellsberg obviously is
Yes,
real.
yeah, yeah.
In doing the research on the miracle at Massawa, one of the things that came up was that there was an incredible amount of missing money for the base. Back then, the regular armed forces were paid with vouchers, so it wasn't a big deal. But the people who were regenerating this base were Eritreans. Well, they did not get paid with vouchers. They were paid with money. So these large amounts of money, these millions of dollars, were being shipped to Massawa to pay the civilian workers, and it wasn't getting there. They actually worked for 5 to 6 weeks without getting paid, and were on the verge of striking and shutting down everything simply because the money was disappearing. So my angle for the fiction part of this was to come in and build the story as to what was going on with the money. Now, and I actually visited the National Archives to see what I could find on this, because everything had been declassified then, including some of the early OSS CIA stuff. And the answer wasn't there. There were things that were alluded to. For example, one of the big things that was going on in World War II was a lot of private contracting. In fact, there was a Senate committee headed by Truman. It was called the Truman Committee. That at the time that Massawa was being resurrected, the Truman Committee was investigating corruptness and graft in one of the private companies that was supposed to be supplying airplane parts and parts, et cetera, for the Allies. And British pilots were being lost because of the poor quality of these parts. And other things were going on. Money was disappearing there, anyway, the big thing there was, okay, what in Massawa, a representative, there was an office for this company, and the company was in charge of paying the civilians. So the same company that was being investigated by the Truman Committee was in charge of paying these civilians, and the money wasn't getting there. So the question was why. And then when you get into it, there were all kinds of things going on in Eritrea, including the building of a pretty big Vichy base. And I don't know if you know who the Vichy are, but the Vichy were Nazi supporters that were doing everything in their power to help Rommel to the north, supply him, because not only did the British not have supplies, the Germans didn't either. So the Germans were struggling with supplies as much as we were, and the Vichy in Eritrea were trying to help him.
Now,
So
were the Vichy primarily French, or?
that's a great question. to answer it, let me go back just a little bit, because 70 years prior to the war is when Italians basically colonized Eritrea, taking over the capital of Asmara. In fact, they rebuilt Asmara in the image of Rome, and they actually called it Little Rome. They took over everything. They relegated the native Eritreans to 1/4 of their own city. It was really pretty sad. But so when World War II hit, there was a natural population of Italians that were already there. So it was a little bit of a melting pot for these Vichy. The French were, the French, those that really couldn't make up their mind who they were going to support. The French were there, but there was a huge Italian base as well. Now, the interesting thing, some of the Italians were very pro-German, and others were saying, hey, we just want to live in peace. We've been here for 70 years. The war's not our issue. We want no part of it. So there was a peaceful element of Italian, but then there was a more renegade that was hell-bent, determined to support Rommel. But it was a little bit of a mix. It wasn't just the Italians. It was the Free French were in there as well.
Wow. Okay. So, so the characters in your novel, Massawa, are fictional characters then.
Except for
And except for yes, and the protagonist or one of the main characters is a woman,
yes.
spy. How historically accurate would that have been? Were there women like Kit working in North Africa or anywhere for the OSS at that point,
That is a
undercover
great
like
question.
she did?
And that was one of the big themes that I wanted to pull through. And yes, there were. Women have always been spies for their homelands for centuries, but it's never been in an organized fashion, meaning, that they're working for a spy agency. Well, in 1942 is when the OSS got started, and primarily to help win the war. The first director of the OSS was a guy named Bill Donovan, William Donovan, a.k.a. Wild Bill. And he got that reputation for two reasons. Number one, he was fearless. He was brilliant. He was a brilliant man. He was fearless, but he was a notorious womanizer. And he knew that women were a natural emetic for men's secrets. So he actively recruited women, and many women went through the base camps that the U.S. was getting started, and the MI6 from Britain was helping the U.S. get the OSS started. They helped with the training, but we had a lot of training camps here as well. There was one in Canada called Camp X, and then there were several in the United States that were hidden in the national parks, and that was news to me. I didn't realize that. But they had OSS camps hidden in the national parks, and they were sending these people to these camps for training, including women. Donovan sent women everywhere, all over the globe. Now, he had obviously a large contingency in Europe, but he had them in North Africa. He had them in the Middle East. He had them in the Far East. He sent them everywhere. He wanted eyes and ears everywhere. So that was my impetus for Kit. And not only did I want a strong female protagonist. This is a young woman. She's smart. She was before she came to the OSS, she was an intelligence analyst for the Department of Defense. So this is no mental lightweight here. She was fearless to a degree, but one of the things that I really needed to show here was her naivete. And not only her naivete, but the naivete of the OSS. This is a new organization. We didn't know what we didn't know. And Kit goes into this full force, not knowing what she didn't know and believing, that she could do the job. And because in Massawa, there was a large contingency of the British. The British were the military control of the country at the time this was going on. MI6 sent their agent with Kit to Massawa with Kit's job. Kit is the one who found where she thought the missing money was from. She traced some of the missing bills to a Nazi bank in Cairo. So she was going to go looking for the money, and they sent Mark Williams, or MI6 sent Mark Williams to investigate the Vichy side of things. That, okay, well, we're looking for the money. Are the Vichy also playing a role in making it disappear? So that collaboration, and you've got this experienced MI6 agent and this very confident but naive new American agent. So building the dynamics of that was a lot of fun.
Now, when I got to the end of this book, it became obvious that this is also part of a series.
Mhm.
How many books are in the series, and where are you in terms of
I'm already
finishing them?
working. Not. I am working on the sequel to this, and it's one of the things that I'm sure you have heard over the years, and you know that sometimes the more you uncover, the more there is to talk about. And that happened with this. The more I uncovered about what was going on in Massawa in North Africa at the time, it's just a rich area for storytelling, and it's been largely ignored. I mean, until my brother told me about the miracle at Massawa, I'd never even heard of it. And I had to look up Eritrea, exactly where on the Red Sea is Eritrea. So I think there's lots of potential here. I have kind of mapped out three in this series, possibly more, depending on what I uncover as I do the research for the next book. And I'm already having to go back to the National Archives to get data on some of the things that was happening.
So you mentioned that before, that you went to the National Archives. Now, does that mean you physically go there?
Yeah, yeah. I'm
And
in Northern
where,
Virginia.
okay, and that's in DC?
No, it's actually, well, it's very close to DC. It's actually
Okay,
in Maryland.
okay.
But yeah, it's about an hour and a half from my house. It's not bad, but it's a little bit arduous. You have to apply, you have to fill out, all kinds of forms, and there's a security check and all that kind of stuff. But once you go through that, if you ever have the opportunity to go, it was incredible. I met with one of their librarians, told them specifically what I was doing and what kind of information I was seeking. The librarian disappeared, came back about 30 minutes later with this box, and he said, have at it. So I'm sitting there going through this box, looking at handwritten notes between Roosevelt and Churchill, and Eisenhower and Roosevelt.
Do they give
Handwritten.
you gloves to wear to
No.
touch them? No?
That's what amazed me. It's kind of like, oh, you got to be kidding. I'm thinking I should be using tweezers on these things.
Yeah, yeah.
But some of it was encased in plastic, but a lot of it was not. But it was. I could have spent days and days there just looking at all the things that had been declassified, that rich data. But anyway, I was able to get what I needed to get Massawa going well, and but I already, based on what I found there, I already know I need to go back. And I know what I need to find out when I go back to research, but the next in this series.
Wow, wow. Are you able to photocopy things or
No,
no?
they don't want you taking pictures. At least they didn't when I was there, and it's been a couple years now since I've been there. The What they do allow you to do is take notes.
Right. Yes.
Yeah, yeah. They don't want you taking pictures and all that kind of stuff, but they do allow you to take notes.
Could you record notes? Could you like read things out loud into a recorder?
That's a really good question. I didn't ask that question, but I will when I go next time.
Yeah, because that seems like that would be a faster way than, than
It's
copying a lot of
it
stuff
is a
down.
little bit of a library quiet. I don't,
Mm,
but it'd be worth finding out if they had a private room you could go to where you could voice record. I think it's
yeah.
a great question. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. You're welcome. Yeah, the idea of finding, being able to dig through things and finding something that is unknown, some new story, you know,
Mhm.
I
And
find
that
history fascinating.
I was actually talking with the librarian because in the story, as in most history, there are gaps. There's huge gaps, and a lot of attention wasn't being paid to Africa at the time, so people weren't recording. One of the most valuable resources I found was the book that was actually written by the then Admiral Ellsberg, who documented what happened at Massawa, and I was able to find his grandson. His grandson actually developed a website dedicated to his grandfather, but his grandson made available letters that his grandfather had written to his grandmother while he was at Massawa. So it didn't answer all the gap, didn't fill in all the gaps, but it helped fill in a lot of the gaps. So really, to get this done, I had to look under a lot of rocks and pull in from a lot of different resources. And then ultimately, the gaps I was able to fill in with creative fiction.
Okay, so you decided you were going to set a novel or a series of novels in this area, kind of around this time where the base was being resurrected. You start doing your research. How do you actually, the process of writing and researching, like, did you do a whole bunch of research, plan the whole book, and then start writing, or do you start writing and then realize what you don't know and go research it?
Mhm. It was the latter. I did a
Yeah.
lot because I had not heard of Massawa. And I did not know a whole lot about what was going on in North Africa at the time, other than Rommel. I mean, everybody knew what Rommel did in North Africa, but I really wasn't into the details. Um, that I did a year's worth of research before I ever started writing. But as I started writing, I needed more research. And when you start writing, that's where you kind of figure out where the gaps are. So when I'm writing that when the gaps show up, I see what I can find on those gaps. If I can't find anything, then I know how to fill it in with creative fiction. But these people who say, authors will say they're a plotter or a pantser. It's somebody that flies by the seat of their pants and just creates as they go, or somebody that plots out everything from the get-go. I don't think there's either or. I think all authors, it's got to be a mix.
Yeah.
If you're trying to write literary, you've got to have that beacon at the end. You got to know where your themes are going. You got to know how your arcs are being played out. So there's a degree of planning that has to be there, but you also need to have that flexibility to, okay, I found a new piece of information that's going to influence this chapter. Um, I think that it's a healthy mix of both.
So which character did you start with in your mind? Was it Kit?
It was Kit. It was
Yeah.
Kit. Um, there's a large intelligence community around us, as you know. We're close to Washington, and so it's always they've always fascinated me. And coming of age in the 70s and 80s, the women's lib movement, the ability for women to do what we do now and what we take for granted now, it wasn't there then. In fact, even doing the research for Kit, there were people in the Senate who did not think women had a role in combat areas, even though the British women had been, in filling every role they could for the Brits for a couple of years. Some Americans, not all of them, but some Americans were very slow in endorsing women in any form. It was in World War II that the Waves and the WACs and all those female organizations within the military were formed, but most of them had restrictions on what women could and could not do. That was one reason why Wild Bill Donovan just broke all the molds. He said, "Forget
Hmm.
that noise. I need women. We're using them," and it kind of paved the way to, tore down those barriers to get women more equally involved and let their skill set be shown.
Yeah,
So, and
it's
I
interesting
wanted
that
to.
that people, that it's like they don't want women in combat because they're protecting them or something. And yet women have always been on the front lines as nurses and as civilians,
Mhm.
and are often the victims of violence in war. They aren't protected, so, you know, let women learn how to defend themselves. That's
It's kind of like that mindset of victimization. You know what I mean? That, um, and this is on the part of women, that if we don't see ourselves empowered, then and we think we need to be protected, and we think we can't do this, and we think we can't do that, then automatically we become victims of the people who support that ideology,
yeah,
which I think
yeah.
was a bunch of horse hockey. um, and so what Donovan did and what happened after that and what has happened since then with the empowerment of women. I've got two daughters, so I was very interested in making sure as they grew up, that they understood that no, you have no limits. You can do what you figure out what you want to do, and you can do it. Don't let somebody predispose you to thinking a certain way. And it didn't happen overnight, and it I think it started with World War One and it came to an age in World War Two when women had to be used at home, to man the factories. Well, they just weren't manning factories; they were all over the world, and Donovan put them there.
Wow. Right. You're listening to Writers' Voices, and our guest today is Pam Webber, author of Massawa. Before we get further than this, I wanted to ask, your previous three books you said were a series. Where and when were they set?
The first one is called the Wiregrass, and there's an area in a geographic area in the deep South. It's includes the Panhandle of Florida, the southeast section of Alabama, and the southwest section of Georgia, and it's called the Wiregrass because the weather and the climate is such that it grows this nasty grass that will cut your feet if you walk across it barefoot.
Oh my gosh.
So yeah, it's a coming of age story in the Wiregrass, and that was my first one. The second one is called Moonwater, and all three in the first series were stories that I wanted my children and grandchildren and great grandchildren on infinitum to know. The second one is Moonwater, and that is based in Central Virginia. And I don't know if you're old enough to remember Hurricane Camille. Camille is a massive hurricane that came up from the Gulf Coast, made a left turn in the middle of the country, and converged with another storm system right over the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, and caused incredible flooding in the middle of the night. Nobody was expecting it. This was before the time of radar. And anyway, hundreds of
What
people died.
year was it? What year
This
was
was
that?
1969.
Well, I'm old enough, but I don't remember it.
Yeah, 1969, and it was Nelson County was the worst county hit, and it was right next to where we lived, which was in Amherst County. And a friend of mine from high school lost something like 23 members of her immediate family that night in that flood. It washed away towns, it washed away, villages. It was a horrible flooding event. In fact, they had in the rainfall, I think they said they estimated 80 billion gallons of rain fell that in a
Oh my
very
gosh.
like 8 hours of rain of time. There was a penitentiary at the time in Richmond, and the flooding was so severe that they took the inmates out of the penitentiary and lined them up on the three bridges crossing the James River at Richmond, Virginia, to spot the bodies. And they still found bodies in the Chesapeake Bay. So that was a big event. It was a huge event at the
Wow.
time, and even here in Virginia, unless you lived through it and know about it, not many people know about it. So that's one of the story, or one of the themes that is featured in Moonwater. And then the third one is it's my very first attempt at doing a two point of views book. The first one was a nurse, a.k.a. That was me, or my template, or a nurse in that time period, and it was during the Vietnam War period. And then her significant other, Andy, who goes to war. And Andy's part is very significant because my husband was in Vietnam, and all of the even though Andy is loosely linked to my husband, Jeff isn't the prototype for Andy, but his stories, the stories on his side of the POV are real. Some of them are hysterically funny. You think, oh my gosh, did that really happen? And then others obviously are tragic. But the stories, the events that happened on that side of the book were real, and my husband was able to. Him and other people that were in Vietnam at the time were able to help me get that into a combined story called Life Dust. And the title came from there in Vietnam. What a lot of people don't realize is that Vietnam has never been in charge of its own destiny until now. It had been an occupied country forever, China, French, etc. And whenever those military armies would come in, they would father children with Vietnam women. Well, the soldiers didn't want the children, and the women sometimes and their families certainly didn't want the children, and those children became known as life dust.
Mm-hmm.
So that concept kind of grew up to be the idea of people that don't matter, people that are insignificant, and part of that is to show how and where they did become significant.
Wow. So you said these books were a series.
Mm-hmm.
How are they related to one another? What's the
Well,
through line?
in the first book, The Wiregrass, Nettie and Andy are in that one. In Moon Water, Nettie and Andy are in that one. And in the
Okay.
third one, Nettie and Andy are in the third one.
Okay. Okay. And so it's the same, you're following
The
these
characters,
people,
yes.
these characters through their life span, sort of.
Mhm.
Okay. Gotcha. Gotcha. So Massawa seems like quite a departure from that in a way. Um,
It,
it's not just, it's a World War II novel and it's a spy novel. So that's quite different.
the One of the things that I learned, as an academic, I had to write a lot. I wrote a textbook, I did research articles, and creative fiction is a lot harder than that. It's a lot harder than writing a textbook. It's a lot harder than writing research articles. And and I learned this after I was lucky enough to get a publisher for The Wiregrass. I had to go through the editing process. And that was a painful thing for me. The first transcript, or the first manuscript of The Wiregrass, was 119,000 words. By the time it hit the publisher's developmental reviewers and line by line reviewers, that manuscript got cut to 93,000 words.
Wow.
So it was a really great lesson in brevity, but it also hit me that I didn't know what I didn't know about creative writing. I was lucky, got a good book out of it, but I knew there were things that were missing. So I started looking for a class that would help me get what I needed. There was nothing in Winchester. There was nothing in Northern Virginia at all. But I found this organization called James River Writers. And on their website, they were getting ready to start a class on creative writing. And it was going to be led by a New York Times bestselling author, David L. Robbins. So I signed up for it, talked with Jeff, and said, I can make the 2-hour trip to Richmond once a week to take this class. I want to do it. So in the process of getting ready to do the class, I happened to tell my publicist what I was doing and who was going to be teaching the class. Well, unbeknownst to me, she calls David Robbins and says, hey, Pam Webber's going to be taking this class. She has just written a book. Would you consider blurbing the book? And she told me this on the day that I've got to drive down there and meet this man. So I'm about to wig out because I'm thinking, okay, he's going to think that I am just taking the class to get him to blurb the book. But anyway,
Aw.
I drove down there, and when I went into the class, he's sitting there at the desk, and I go up to him and I said, I introduced myself and I said, I really need to apologize. I did not know Stephanie was going to contact you about blurbing. And he stopped. He stood up, and David L. Robbins is a mountain of a man. I mean, he's huge. He's tall. He's just a big, prominent guy. And he stuck his finger in my face and he said, "You're good, but I can make you better." And he had read the book and he did blurb it. His blurb is on the front cover of the Wiregrass. But what happened is we took that 6-week course, and then there were 4 of us out of that class that formed a writing group with David. And we studied with him for 2 years to learn the infrastructure of writing good novels, not just memoirs, not just, feel good, ancestry type stuff. But I knew I wanted to branch out. And I figured after the first 3 and 2 years of working with David, I could do it. And David, some of his, in fact, the books that have hit the New York Times bestseller list for him have been World War II books. So with a big lump in my throat, I asked him to read Massawa when it was done. And David doesn't hold back. This was not an easy class. I came out of his class in tears more than once. But he said, "My job is not to make you feel good. My job is to make you a better writer." And he did. But anyway, I sent him Massawa, and God bless him. He liked it. In fact, he gave me a video that I actually put on my Facebook, talking about the transition of my writing from the first series to the second series. And he basically said, once you start reading this book, if you put it down, you must have had a stroke. He said, it was Turner. And for him to say, he's a dear friend of mine now, I just love him to pieces. But for him to do that with his expertise, that was a milestone for me, big milestone for him. And kudos to him. He's a great author.
Well, Pam, why don't you read a little bit for us from Massawa?
Okay. The section that I picked out to read, let me set the stage for you a little bit. It's when Mark Williams, who is the MI6 agent, and Kit have reached Massawa. Kit has gotten there. She's not sure where Mark is yet. She's gotten to the hotel. And they had a meeting. Mark and Kit had a meeting in London, and it was a little bit of a tense meeting. So when Kit gets to Massawa and gets to her hotel room, the things that unfold add a little bit more to the tension that had been building between the two in London. So, and that kind of introduces this section. Unlocking the French doors of her room, she stepped outside. The raised stone patio combined 2 lounge chairs and a small table. A balance wrapped the space along the left side and front, while the right side opened to a short L-shaped flight of stairs leading to the garden. A tall, viney jasmine bush stood at the base of the patio, blocking the view of the steps from the other rooms. With luck, she'd be able to come and go unnoticed if necessary. A slight breeze carried the delicious scent of moonflowers over the patio. Closing her eyes, she took a deep breath and imagined Jake at her side, enjoying the moment. Opening her eyes, she froze as a tall shadow moved rapidly up the stairs. Her gun lay in her handbag on the dresser. Stupid. She turned for the door. "I thought you'd never get here," the shadow whispered. "Mark? What the hell are you doing here?" she hissed. Moving quickly, he put his fingers to her lips, his arms around her waist, and guided her back inside. Closing and locking the door, he closed the blackout drapes. "What do you think you're doing?" Kit hissed, wiping the feel and taste of his fingers from her lips with the back of her hand. "I'm your welcoming committee," he said. "By the way, keep your gun within an arm's reach at all times. The OSS should have taught you that. And keep the curtains closed." Kit's cheeks stung with embarrassment. "How were your flights?" Mark asked with a smile. "Long," she replied, glaring at him. Dressed in black pants, shirt, and a belt, he looked very cosmopolitan. "I'm sorry to have startled you, but I did say I'd contact you in Asmara." "You could have said when and where," Kit snapped. And you could have asked, Mark said teasingly. Are you settled? We need to review our plans. He moved toward the love seat. Wait, Kit said. How did you know this was my room? More importantly, how do we know it's secure? I've already checked it for listening devices and there were none. What? You've been here already? How? When? Again, my apologies, Mark said, touching her arm. She pushed his hand away. Don't touch me. Explain now. It was a necessary intrusion on your privacy to ensure our safety. You can sleep well knowing no one is listening. Even if someone put a device in here, it wouldn't work well. Corner rooms, especially this one, have too many 90-degree angles, which distort sound. Corner room? Kit's anger peaked. You chose this hotel. You made the reservations. You selected the room. You've already been in here snooping around like you own the place. Why are you in MI6 so damn interested in where I sleep? Now, Kit, Mark said with a grin, you can't expect me to give up all of our secrets. He poured a glass of water from the pitcher on the table and eased into the closest chair. Please sit. We have a lot to go over. Kit snatched the glass from his hand, slapped it on the table, and leaned in, her eyes blazing. You think what you're doing is and saying is cute? It's not. It's arrogant. It's dangerous. And you've been that way since Washington. We're supposed to be partners in this, and you're playing games, sneaking around, manipulating everything, and doling out bits and pieces of information I need as it suits or amuses you. She took a step back. I don't trust you, Mark, and that's not a good position for a partner to be in. He stared at her for a moment, his eyebrows raised and pupils dilated. Point well taken. Let's talk. Motioning to the other chair, he leaned forward and crossed his arms on the table. Be careful with that, Kit said snidely, her eyes shooting sparks. With what? Leaning forward and folding your arms like that. You did the exact same thing the exact same way in London. It's another one of your tells. Mark stared at her again. Well played, he smiled and put his hand out. Truce?
Thank you. That was Pam Webber reading from Massawa. So how long did you spend working on this book altogether?
Oh, 2 years. 2 years. The better part of the first year was researching, and then the second year was getting it written and edited.
And do you tend to write a very fast first draft and then go back and work it, or do you kind of work it as you go?
That's a great question. I actually do both. There's some sections that it just right there, and it comes fast. And then others I've got to draft out because I may be missing information. It may be one of those blind spots in history that we don't have information on. So what I tend to do is I will draft out where, number one, first thing, I know how the book is going to end before I ever start it. I have to do that because of the story arcs and the character arcs and all that kind of stuff. And then based on the research I've done, I go in and I put like 1 or 2 line descriptions of each chapter. That way it tells me how many chapters I need, and I can ferret out, is this going to be too much for one chapter? Do I need to split it into 2 chapters, et cetera? So I'll have a 2 or 3 page chapter outline when I really dig in and start writing. But then again, as with most writers, sometimes I can be driving along. I can wake up in the middle of the night and think, "Oh my gosh, this is a great thing," and I've got a storyline or a paragraph, and I'll get up and I will write it down and I'll add it to the manual when I get back to my computer. So it's really a combination. It really is a combination of both. But I believe Dave Robbins when he tells me if the infrastructure of your novel is solid, the story's going to be solid. So I try to make sure that that infrastructure is set and ready to go.
That makes a lot of sense. And then, like, how many drafts do you tend to do?
Oh my gosh, you don't want to know. The when I actually put the end on it, with that very first draft, I walk away from it for a couple weeks and then I come back and I read it out loud, because the brain hearing things and seeing things and speaking things, it puts the connotation, that puts the language and the meanings and all that kind of stuff into your brain in 3 different ways. So I read it aloud, I do any tweaking that needs to be done, and then I send that. I have a, in addition to the publishers, editors, and stuff like that, I have a personal editor, developmental editor. She was the first one that worked with me on the Wiregrass. I send it to her and say, tell me, where the flaws are, do the characters work? Do I have, anyway. And once that comes back to me, then I make any edits or changes that she suggests, and then I submit it to the publisher, and then their editors have at it. But I am editing that thing up to the moment that I push the final button. In fact, it was kind of funny. Including all of that kind of editing, I gave it to my oldest daughter, Sarah, right before I was ready to submit it. And I said, I want you to read it and edit and see if you can find any errors. And God bless her, after it had been through all of these people, including me, she found 7 errors.
Oh my
7.
goodness.
And I was so impressed. I told her she's got to be, she is officially now my editor until I submit to the publisher. It was little things, but they were important little things. And one of the things that I actually showed Sarah is when the Kirkus, I don't know if you knew this or not, but Kirkus reviewed it and gave it a starred review, which only about 3% of the books that they review ever get a star, and it automatically enters you into the running for a $50,000 prize. So I was really tickled to get that star, I got to tell you.
Oh, no
But
kidding.
and looking at their review down at the bottom, they actually rate certain things of the book, the cover and the editing, and they had given an A on the editing. So I showed Sarah the A on the editing because she probably was the insurance that gave that editing.
So, like, what was something that she found?
Let me see. One of them was, it was kind of a tight thing. Remember in World War II, the king died and Queen Elizabeth took over. And one of the sentences after that, I had still had his or her, I forget which one, but the gender was messed up. And Sarah found that. She found a sentence that still had 2 these in it, a duplicate word. So, it's my editor, my publisher told me one time, and she had published a book, and she said the day it came out, I opened the book and there was a boo-boo on the page. She said, we're always going to have it. So I was particularly glad that Sarah read it with such a fine-tooth comb and with fresh eyes and found it. Not to say that somebody might not read it and find an error tomorrow, but it's not been,
who knows?
we didn't.
So the setting of Massawa is a very important aspect of the story. Did you go there?
No, I wish I could. For the sequel, though, we're planning on going to North Africa. Years, yeah. And maybe if I can squeeze out some time, we'll slip down to Eritrea. But the blessing on the climate and all that kind of stuff actually came from 2 sources. Number one, the internet, and then number 2, Admiral Ellsberg's book. He was quite explicit on where the challenges were, and it's such a dichotomy in the mountains, which is where the capital of Asmara is. It's beautiful. It's cool. The city, the Italians had rebuilt the city in the image of Rome, calling it Little Rome. So you've got this beautiful tree-lined, streets and beautiful buildings. And then the minute you start east, you start down this treacherous, and there's actually video of this road that you can watch. This treacherous, switchback, dangerous road that you have to take to get out of the mountains. And then once you get out of the mountains, you've got this 25, 30-mile stretch of desert. is from Asmara down to Massawa is it's a 7,000 foot drop, and from cool down into the desert. And
Wow.
when you get to Massawa, Massawa is actually known as the hottest place on earth. Absolutely, 120 degrees was nothing. In fact, reading Ellsberg's book and how he was trying to deal with the heat was quite interesting. And I don't know, many people, I didn't know it, so I'm assuming a lot of people didn't know it, that not all of the Brits were crazy about the Americans entering the war. And one of the things that was going on at Massawa real time was that there was a group called the British Wire Phone and Wireless Company or something like that. I forget the exact name of it. But
Cable
anyway,
and wireless, maybe?
yes, that's
Yeah,
it. British
yeah.
Cable and Wireless. And they were there. They had been sent there to reestablish the phone lines between Massawa and Asmara. But interesting, they had not done it since the Brits had said it can't be resurrected. So they were sitting there with all this equipment, stuff like that, not doing anything. And then here comes Ellsberg saying, "Oh yeah, we can fix it. Not a big deal." They stonewalled that man and did not set up, procrastinated in getting him a phone line to headquarters in Massawa. And it was because this company, these people were ticked off. Number one, that the Americans were in the war, and number two, that they said that the Massawa could be resurrected when their own British people had said no, it can't. So the climate there, they had taken up residence in the captain's quarters, so where Captain Ellsberg would have stayed, which was air conditioned. These British cable and wireless people squatted and wouldn't leave. So here's the captain of the base. He says, "I've got more important things to do." So he went into an unair conditioned house. So his stories of dealing with the heat, um, and both in the office and how they were trying to keep going in the heat and how many salt tablets they had to have every hour and how many gallons of water they had to drink every day. And one of the stories that came out of the letters that I absolutely loved, something new had been developed in the United States, and it was called nylon socks. So he had asked his wife to send him some nylon socks because supposedly they wick sweat away from the feet. And his feet were getting blistered because he was sweating so much that he was walking in salt pools in his shoes.
Oh my goodness. Oh
Yeah.
my
So
goodness.
the climate played a huge role, both in the real miracle at Massawa, and in the story.
Well, I learned from, I mean, I think I knew that there was some resentment by the Brits. Some of them didn't want the Americans in the war, but a lot of them were resentful that it took so long for the
Yes.
Americans to help.
Yeah.
And
You're exactly
yeah,
right.
yeah,
Two areas of dissent. They said we've gone. Some said we've done it by ourselves this far. We'll finish it out. Stay home. And then the others said, we've been struggling. Where have you been? Where have you been? And so I actually have two things in the book. The British cable wireless story, of course, is in there, and then there was a British secretary or administrative assistant in Asmara that lost somebody, a loved one, and carried resentment about why did it take you so long to get here? And maybe, I would not have lost him if we had had help earlier. So
yeah.
now, and that's not to say there are a lot of Brits that love the fact that we got in it, especially Churchill. He would have loved for us to have gotten in it at least a year earlier. But there were some that weren't, and that really surprised me. I really hadn't thought about it. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah, I
Um,
hadn't either.
you
Yeah,
can't do the research without that coming up.
wow, wow. So, the other thing was when you write about the private contractors there, and it makes me think about the fact that there's people who are always pushing to privatize government services as if private companies always perform better, but obviously historically that is not true.
Well, there was an interesting discussion about that I found, and it was in the stuff that had to do with the Truman Committee, that when in times of war, there's such a push to get it done fast that the oversight was not built in.
Yeah.
And if anything came out of the Truman Committee, and he later became president, so you know that he followed all this stuff through to make sure that oversights were built in, both in choosing who, what, when, where, and how, but to make sure that people were, that these companies were taking care of business. And that actually came out, a big part of what we do now kind of emerged out of what the Truman Committee and then what Truman did through his presidency, for accountability. He was a very financially accountable, politician.
Yeah, and if you don't go through those protocols and processes, you end up with things like the reflecting pool.
Isn't that the truth? Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So in our last few minutes, Pam, I want to talk a little bit about your path to publication. Your
Okay.
first book was published by Simon and Schuster.
No, first book was She Writes Press.
Oh, what was She Writes Press? Okay.
And then, well, actually, all of my books have been done through She Writes Press, but they've had different distributors. For the
Okay.
first three, excuse me, they had, Ingram. They were with the Ingram implant, and then now She Writes is, imprint of Simon and Schuster. So
Yes,
Brooke
yeah.
Warner
So that's
and
where it's showing up now is on the Simon and Schuster
yeah,
website.
and
So
which
so
I'm
how
thrilled.
does She Writes Press work? How did you get with them?
The I had in my academic life, I mentioned before that I had actually written a textbook, so I was very familiar, about three versions of the textbook, very familiar with the nonfiction publishing world. And it obviously had some very attractive things, but it had a whole lot of not attractive things, including copyright, what was still yours and what wasn't, and so forth. But I called my editor, and initially that textbook was published by Lippincott Williams and Wilkins, and then Walters Kluwer bought out LWW, and so I was working with Walters Kluwer at the end, and I talked with my editor there, and I said, okay, who do you know in the land of fiction? Because I've written a novel and I want to get it in the hands of, um, somebody to tell me whether it's, what to do with it, put it in a drawer or keep going with it. And she actually, told me about Brooke Warner, and Brooke had just left Seal. This was like 15 years ago, 16 years ago. Had just left Seal Press to start She Writes Press.
Ah,
And so I reached out to Brooke, and she graciously said, send me your book. So I sent it to her, and a couple weeks later, I got the most wonderful email of my life, and she said, we want to publish it, but we've got to put it through the developmental and line by line edits and blah blah blah, all the stuff that editors do. And she was such a refreshing publisher. You know what I mean?
yeah.
She's just, I don't know if you know Brooke or not, but she's just a doll, and she's built a wonderful, absolutely wonderful company. So I have stayed with her for all of my books. And the fact now that they're an imprint of Simon and Schuster, and we've got the global distribution through Simon and Schuster, I am thrilled about.
Oh, absolutely. Well, congratulations on that and on all of your books. And we're out of time, but we always end with a quote, and I found one that I think applies to Kit.
Okay.
It's a rose in a desert can only survive on its strength, not its beauty.
Amen, sister. Great,
And that's
great.
from Machona Dilwayo. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly or not, but
I may
anyway.
steal that one from you, Monica.
Oh, feel free. And thank you, and see you all next week on Writers' Voices.